Hi everyone, wanted to do a video about enforcement. And this is kind of based on a more recent kind of realization when it comes to practicing holacracy or really using any sort of explicit agreement to help collaborate, define clear expectations and things like that, that there's kind of an inherent bias towards the front end of things, towards the actual defining of what the expectation is. I would typically call this side the encoding side, right? So there's a tension someone feels, and that gets explored, and something gets written down. Yay! And for, the person who feels the tension, that's a great thing. For the person who doesn't feel the tension, but is in relationship with the other person and considers the request and, gets, they get some context on the impact that it could have, whatever, something they could realistically do, that can actually feel good for them too, because now, the expectations are hopefully, clearer. So hopefully, conflicts are, less likely to be a kind of a surprise. So that's on this side of things. I would just kind of call that encoding. Now, what's on this side of things, this is what I would typically call enforcing. Now, if you want, because I think it's actually important to come up with some kind of other versions of this, you could call that reinforce or nudging or supporting. Because that's really what this side is about. Someone's made a conscious agreement to something. What happens when it seems like they're not following it and you notice? Well, again, there's kind of a version of this. If you are kind of like the target of it, where there's positive versions of it. Again, not saying this is always the case, clearly, but there are at least some examples or versions of someone reminding you of an agreement or a structure and having that feel supportive and not judgmental. If you think about like driving on the highway and you see a speed limit sign and that reminds you to check your speedometer and you realize, oh, shoot, I've been driving faster than I thought. And it reminds you. Or even the lines on a highway, right? These are all kind of forms of liberating structure, right? That hopefully don't feel constraining. They actually feel liberating. That's kind of the key point. So again, I would say there's versions of it that are good, good, and good. There's one kind of last little role, though, and that is the person doing the, I'll call it, reminding, checking, basically, the enforcing. Right, this person actually having to do that job, actually having to speak up and say, hey, I think, there's a policy that says you have to do this thing first. I don't think you did that first. Are you aware that policy exists? Yes or no? If yes, and you ignored it, why did you ignore it? If no, okay, cool. Now that you know it, I don't know, however the conversation goes from there. Is there kind of a positive version where that feels good? And kind of my hypothesis was actually no. Like actually at best, what we could really hope for is, something that it can still feel like leadership. It can still feel like you're helping, but you're kind of stepping up and representing the agreement or the legitimacy or the trust in the relationship, right? You're really standing up and speaking for that because not only can it be socially awkward to have to do that and point out, hey, I think you're not sticking to this agreement and all the baggage that can come with that, or the projections, or people getting defensive and thinking that you're, judging them, whatever, which you may be, or, it's very common that happens. So it's understandable that they might think that. Even all the social dynamics that make it difficult. But I would say even too, there's some logic to not wanting to have to be in this role. Maybe I'd say this role, right? Because it can almost seem like if you have to step in and remind them, it's possible, maybe not conscious, but it's possible that it could seem like you're kind of delegitimizing the agreement, right? Because if the agreement was made and people are supposed to stick to it, and we're trusting them to be adults to stick to their agreements, then having to step in and remind them, is that kind of condescending? Is that actually reducing trust in the system overall, right? Shouldn't I be trusting them to do it? Now, all of which I think there's a good response to, which is no. It's not actually doing any of those things if you do it well. But my point is it can seem that way, and I would say it's understandable that could, kind of be your belief system, however unconscious it may be. So with all of that said, this little video it's all about enforcement. The point I'm trying to make is that, this side of things, the encoding, can be a bit of a trap, right? Because if you're really focused on personal responsibility and sticking to your agreements and, not talking down to people and all that, then you can kind of fall into like a spiral of constantly just trying to solve problems through writing things down that, ironically or paradoxically, right, you're not really putting the effort in and taking the responsibility for stepping in and supporting each other when it seems like that agreement is not being held to, and bringing it up to their attention, right, and checking in, which is what's going to be necessary. And it's understandable that you don't want to, because I think really, this is almost like the best possible scenario that you can get. And I thought that this kind of way of thinking about it might help explain why I think enforcement is so difficult for people to do. And maybe considering this might put a little bit more of a attention on thinking through how to kind of do enforcement in a way that feels, mature, adult to adult, and healthy for each other. So anyway, I hope this model was helpful. I'll talk to you soon.